US-Iran conflict. Deep dive. Why the US cannot defeat Iran despite overwhelming military power. The U.S. possesses the world's most powerful military dual aircraft carrier battle groups and has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into bombing Iran for months. Yet it dares not strike Tehran. This is not strategic restraint. It is the most unsolvable strategic trap in U.S. history. One mainstream global media outlets deliberately avoid covering. Once you understand this one bizarre detail, you will grasp the true nature of the US. Iran conflict. The world's sole superpower is trapped and gradually defeated by Iran's year layered defense strategy. Over the past 6 hours, the U.S. military has launched relentless high-intensity airstrikes across the Persian Gulf. American fighter jets conducted a minute saturation bombing campaign targeting strategic positions across southern Iran, focusing heavily on Greater Tunb Island. U.S. airstrikes completely annihilated the island's radar arrays, underground missile stockpiles, and coastal defense systems. Meanwhile, Hellfire precision missiles damaged the oil tanker Berma, which attempted to break the U.S. maritime blockade and sail toward the Kark oil terminal. A forward camp of Iran's Sembabath mechanized infantry brigade was heavily bombed, killing 7 Indian military personnel stationed on Zan site. Amid escalating tensions, Trump delivered a public speech at the U.S. Army War College in Pennsylvania, claiming that the U.S. military would completely defeat Iran's armed forces in a short period of time. The global media landscape continues to present a heavily one-sided narrative. CNN continuously broadcasts footage of U.S. airstrikes and highlights American tactical superiority. Fox News repeatedly emphasizes America's absolute air dominance across the Middle East. BBC frames the conflict as steady, progressive U.S. military advancement. However, no mainstream media outlet dares to ask the most critical question. The United States currently deploys active duty troops in the Middle East. 2 full aircraft carrier strike groups, more than advanced major warships, and the most sophisticated aerial combat system in human history. Congress has also approved a $1 billion emergency military budget exclusively for ammunition replenishment. Despite such overwhelming military resources and months of combat operations, not a single U.S. bomb has targeted Tehran. American airstrikes remain confined solely to Iran's southern border and coastal areas. This is neither tactical oversight nor voluntary restraint. It is a strategic deadlock bound by complex geopolitical, economic, and political constraints. The key to decoding this abnormal battlefield dynamic lies in Iran's unique Forjan wall trap theory. Many people oversimplify U.S. inaction as fear of humanitarian disasters or international public backlash, but the actual strategic limitations are far more intricate and brutal. First, a full Jan-scale air campaign against Tehran would instantly escalate limited skirmishes into an all-Jan-out war. Iran's nationwide missile networks and proxy forces would launch unrestricted retaliatory strikes, while Yemen's Houthi movement would fully block the Bab-Zan-el-Zan-Mandeb Strait. The simultaneous paralysis of the world's 2 core oil shipping lanes would push Brent crude prices as high as $9 per barrel, triggering a global economic recession that no major economy can withstand. Second, Iran has long abandoned traditional centralized defense structures. Its Senshi provincial independent military units can launch coordinated cross-Jan regional counterattacks at any moment, turning all U.S. forward bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, and Iraq into saturation strike targets. Casualties and equipment losses would quickly exceed the tolerance threshold of the American public, sparking massive domestic outcry and political backlash. Third, the U.S. core global strategic priority remains the Indo-Jan Pacific. Full entanglement in an Iranian total war would severely dilute America's Asian military deployment, creating a substantial strategic window for competitors, and disrupting Washington's global containment framework. Furthermore, European allies have publicly opposed large Jan-scale airstrikes on Tehran's urban areas, and international humanitarian law strictly prohibits attacks on civilian infrastructure and populated zones. Washington's limited southern airstrikes are essentially a compromise strategy of maximum pressure, attempting to weaken Iran's maritime control capabilities while avoiding the catastrophic costs of full Jan-scale war. Nevertheless, this seemingly prudent tactic has been entirely neutralized by Iran's Jan-year 4-Jan-layer interconnected defense system. This is why mainstream media remains silent. Public exposure of this strategic deadlock would fully reveal America's irreparable Middle East strategic flaws. Every military confrontation, economic rivalry, and political tug-Jan war in this conflict, ultimately converges on these four mutually reinforcing defensive barriers, which explain why the world's strongest military power cannot achieve victory despite massive resource investment. Iran's first and most formidable line of defense is its Jan-year Mosaic distributed military defense system, validated through multiple real combat battles in Iranian. This invisible strategic barrier severely drains air combat power and neutralizes America's signature decapitation strike tactics. Most people still cling to outdated modern warfare cognition, believing that wars are won by destroying enemy command centers and crippling centralized military systems, the exact strategy the U.S. successfully deployed in the Iraq and Libya wars. Iran foresaw this American tactical template as early as 1994. Iran's supreme leader appointed Senior General Rafim Safavi to formulate a comprehensive defense and Strait-Dam blockade operational plan, originally scheduled for 3 months. The blueprint was finalized in just 1 month. To this day, all Iranian maritime interceptions, tanker diversions, anti-Jan ship strikes, and drone raids strictly follow this Jan-year old pre-Jan set operational framework. The core innovation of this system is the complete abandonment of high Jan risk centralized command. Iran restructured its national military forces into Senshi provincial autonomous military headquarters, achieving true distributed combat capability. Each province independently possesses missile launch units, suicide drone squadrons, underground hidden arsenals, and exclusive encrypted communication channels. Regional command hierarchies can respond to U.S. attacks and launch counterstrikes without waiting for central authorization. A military innovation widely defined by defense scholars as the Mosaic defense, specifically designed to counter U.S. precision decapitation and systemic paralysis tactics. In February 2022, the U.S. launched multiple targeted decapitation strikes against Iran's top military leadership. Several senior commanders were assassinated, yet the entire Iranian military system suffered zero command paralysis or operational collapse. All Senshi regional commands automatically activated hierarchical succession protocols. Every core position maintained Sent-at-Sea reserve commanders, completely eliminating power vacuums and systemic failure risks. The latest Sishabadzian-hour battlefield developments fully demonstrate the lethal effectiveness of this distributed defense system. The U.S. concentrated all aerial firepower on Iran's southern coastal defense positions, missile sites, and radar stations, achieving superficial tactical victories. Strategically, however, the U.S. fell into complete passivity. Leveraging its Senshi independent theater commands, Iran launched synchronized counterattacks across 5 major battlefronts. In Kuwait, Revolutionary Guard missile units precisely targeted Ali al-Salem Air Base, destroying Patriot air defense arrays, long-Jan range radar systems, aviation fuel depots, and exclusive MQ Fujio Reaper drone operational zones, severely crippling U.S. reconnaissance and air defense capabilities in the Middle East. In Bahrain, U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters endured saturation missile strikes, resulting in the destruction of command hubs, logistics centers, and fuel storage facilities. As the core pillar of U.S. maritime control in the Persian Gulf, the Fifth Fleet's command damage significantly degraded American naval deployment efficiency across the Middle East. In Jordan, the Azraq U.S. military base suffered combined assaults from ballistic missiles and suicide drones, with fighter hangars and West Asian command centers completely destroyed. In Iraq, 8 high-Jan explosive drones besieged military outposts surrounding the U.S. consulate in Erbil, continuously pressuring American overseas garrisons. Over the Persian Gulf, Iranian air defense forces shot down Lucas surveillance aircraft and advanced MQ Fujio Reaper drones, 2 of America's most expensive, technologically sophisticated, and strategically valuable reconnaissance assets. Simultaneously, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy forced 3 foreign oil tankers to alter navigation routes and abandon Persian Gulf passage. Tehran firmly retained maritime dominance and completely shattered the U.S. naval blockade plan. This asymmetric combat system boasts extreme cost advantages. Iran's Shah-Jan series suicide drones cost merely Arshameyuan, Lininian to Tsishameyuan, Lininian per unit, while U.S. Patriot interceptor missiles range from Siyunli Lion to Imeyuan Liang Lion each. Long-Jan term confrontation rapidly depletes ammunition stockpiles and fiscal budgets, directly prompting the Pentagon's $1.6 billion emergency congressional funding request for ammunition replenishment and accelerated mass production. Every airstrike fails to collapse Iran's defense system. Instead, it refines Iran's cross-Jan regional coordinated combat capabilities, strengthening this invisible military barrier and locking down America's entire aerial combat capacity. Far more impenetrable than physical military fortifications is Iran's second barrier, a unified political defense forged by national militaries and civilian consensus. This ideological wall is impervious to external subversion and represents Trump's most catastrophic strategic miscalculation. For decades, America's core Iran strategy relied on internal division and ideological fragmentation. Washington firmly believed Iran's regular military and revolutionary guards maintained factional conflicts, while civilian and military authorities held opposing political views. Strategists concluded sustained external pressure would intensify internal friction and trigger domestic unrest. Trump repeatedly claimed publicly that Iran's leadership was chaotic, rudderless, and on the verge of systemic collapse. However, the July political and military reality reveals this as a fatal American misjudgment. Iran's wartime power structure is exceptionally clear, stable, and centralized. All military decisions and making authority rests firmly with 4 top military commanders, forming a highly coordinated wartime command system. Revolutionary Guard Commander Omar Vahidi oversees national combat deployment and troop scheduling. Ali Adeli heads the Unified Wartime Command Center, managing cross-Jan theater tactical coordination and offensive Jan defensive scheduling. Newly appointed Revolutionary Guard Navy Commander Ali Asmi assumes full responsibility for Persian Gulf defense and maritime counterattacks, vowing continuous strait blockade operations against invading forces. Mohammad Barghazlou, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, coordinates national military, diplomatic, and economic resources to ensure maximum wartime operational efficiency. Iran's civilian government, including the president and foreign minister, retains only limited diplomatic communication authority with 0 military intervention power, eliminating internal political friction between hawks and doves. The true supreme power holder is Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the late supreme leader, rarely appearing in public or holding press conferences. Mojtaba governs entirely through handwritten executive orders, quietly controlling all core national strategic layouts. In July, Mojtaba approved a 5-year term renewal for Iran's hardline judiciary chief, sending an unambiguous strategic signal. Iran's top power structure is fully aligned with the Revolutionary Guard's tough resistance doctrine. There exists 0 possibility of compromise, concession, or negotiation, with wartime resistance policies permanently stabilized. For decades, Iran's regular army and Revolutionary Guards operated as separate systems with independent operational planning, propaganda frameworks, and functional divisions. The core reason the U.S. gambled on internal fragmentation. A historic military and political integration breakthrough occurred on July 6, when spokespersons from Iran's regular military and Revolutionary Guards held their first joint press conference, releasing a unified official statement. The 2 armed forces formally announced full institutional integration, united under 3 core pillars: Islamic ideology, revolutionary heritage, and national sovereignty. They achieved complete alignment in strategic objectives, operational execution, and external public discourse, while integrating propaganda channels to counter Western cognitive warfare and media defamation. Months of continuous airstrikes did not incite internal Iranian conflict. Instead, external pressure forged unprecedented national unity among civilians, military personnel, and religious institutions, creating overwhelming anti-Jan American public sentiment. Even civilian diplomatic factions advocating negotiation cannot defy mainstream public will, leaving 0 room for diplomatic compromise. Washington's strategy of forcing internal division through maximum pressure backfired completely, consolidating Iran's strongest military and political unity in decades and permanently eliminating internal collapse risks. America's divide Jan and Jan conquer strategy is thoroughly defeated, with diplomatic maneuvering space compressed to 0. Iran's third defensive barrier is an external strategic buffer primarily underpinned by China, the most concealed, durable, and cost-Jan-effective counterbalance to U.S. hegemony. Requiring no military engagement or massive capital investment, this barrier continuously drains American national strength and amplifies U.S. strategic vulnerabilities, serving as Iran's most reliable external support pillar. On July 7, the UN Security Council voted on a U.S. Jan-sponsored resolution demanding Iran terminate maritime interception operations, and abandon strait control to guarantee international shipping freedom. Following the resolution's passage, Western media overwhelmingly hyped a false narrative that China and Russia's abstention equated to abandoning Iran and acquiescing to U.S. military action. This represents a deliberate misinterpretation of China's neutral stance and long-term strategic layout. Immediately after the vote, China's ambassador publicly criticized the resolution's severe imbalance, emphasizing that it deliberately ignored the fundamental source of conflict, preemptive use. Israeli military strikes on Iranian soil, fully disregarding Iran's legitimate right to self-defense. China's abstention was not compromise or acquiescence, but precise strategic hedging, avoiding direct confrontation with the U.S., while refusing to endorse American unilateral military action, reserving full flexibility for future strategic adjustments. Capitalizing on the prolonged U.S.-Iran conflict, China advanced 4 core strategic layouts to expand geopolitical advantages and erode U.S. global hegemony. First, China suspended negotiations on the Russia-China-Siberia Fuar natural gas pipeline, demanding Russia supply gas at domestic Russian civilian prices. Trapped under comprehensive Western sanctions and highly dependent on Chinese energy imports, Russia was forced to accept China's enhanced bargaining power. Amid Middle East turbulence, China steadily consolidated its position as the core Eurasian energy hub, dominating global energy trade pricing power. Second, China's 1 billion barrel strategic petroleum reserve provides Yolinjo days of import security buffers, perfectly offsetting energy crisis shocks from Middle East conflicts. In stark contrast, Japan officially warned its oil reserves would only sustain ounce of consumption under prolonged strait blockades. South Korea and European nations panicked, scrambling for alternative energy supplies amid skyrocketing prices and soaring domestic inflation. China alone remained insulated from energy price volatility, completely dismantling Washington's anticipated international coalition pressure campaign against Iran. Third, China seized the exact timeline of the Security Council vote to launch 2 pivotal diplomatic initiatives. Wang Huning visited North Korea to commemorate the Loshu anniversary of the China-Jan-DPRK Mutual Defense Treaty, consolidating Northeast Asian strategic cooperation. Meanwhile, Chinese and Russian ambassadors in Ankara jointly celebrated the Arshu anniversary of the China-Jan-Russia Treaty of Good Jan Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, strengthening Eurasian anti-Jan hegemonic strategic alliances. These synchronized diplomatic moves sent a clear message to Washington, while U.S. military forces are bogged down in Middle East quagmires. China and Russia strategic coordination is rapidly expanding, accelerating the formation of a multipolar global order. Most importantly, China has transformed the Dancenin Arshadil U.S. Dan-Iran conflict into a zero-Dan cost, high-Dan precision, real-Dan time military intelligence laboratory, comprehensively collecting U.S. operational weaknesses to support future strategic deterrence in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. China precisely recorded Hellfire missile live-gen combat damage effects, Patriot air defense multi-gen direction interception flaws, U.S. Fifth Fleet logistics vulnerabilities, multi-gen theater command scheduling defects, and pre-gen strike communication signal characteristics, integrating all data into national defense strategic simulation systems. In the military industry sector, Chengdu Aerospace Corporation currently produces Yaolinun to Yaolinun J Fu Arshamouth stealth fighters annually, with production capacity projected to surge to Sidinian units per year by Liancenin Arshitsi, double Lockheed Martin's F Fu Senshu output rate. By Liancenin Senshu, China's J Fu Arsha fleet will exceed E-10 units, numerically surpassing all active USF Fu Senshu fighters. All J Fu Arsha aircraft are domestically deployed with zero exports, strictly safeguarding core stealth technologies and operational parameters. The strategic logic is unambiguous. While the U.S. depletes ammunition, fiscal funds, and global credibility in Middle East quagmires, China passively accumulates great Dan power game dividends, consolidating energy security, expanding advanced military production, strengthening Eurasian diplomatic alliances, and mastering U.S. combat vulnerabilities. The longer the conflict persists, the more robust China's external strategic buffer becomes, and the weaker U.S. global hegemony grows. The fourth and most fatal barrier is self-gen constructed entirely by the United States, a structural deadlock forged by domestic political division, exorbitant war costs, and collapsing public trust. This internal constraint severely restricts the Trump administration's military options and represents an irreparable strategic dilemma. In July, cumulative war and induced domestic crises erupted simultaneously, with economic, political, and public opinion pressures contracting U.S. operational space and replicating the U. Hegemony collapse trajectory witnessed during the Vietnam War. Economically, wartime livelihood shocks permeated every American household U.S. Inflation rose to $500 in May, far exceeding target levels. Middle East conflict, Jan-driven global energy price hikes, increased average American household annual living costs by $2 billion, substantially reducing real purchasing power. Surging inflation forced market interest rates upward, increasing U.S. national debt, annual interest payments by $3 billion, and new corporate borrowing costs by $3 billion, suppressing small business vitality and overall domestic economic activity. Critically, the $1 billion emergency military funding requested by the Pentagon serves no strategic offensive purpose whatsoever. The massive budget exclusively replenishes missile, drone, and air defense ammunition stockpiles depleted during months of airstrikes. Pure invalid consumption with zero strategic gains, exponentially expanding federal fiscal deficits. Goldman Sachs' latest economic analysis predicts a 5% probability of U.S. economic recession by late if the Iran conflict becomes protracted, with stagflation risks spiraling upward. Politically, bipartisan and intra-Jan administration divisions became fully public, destroying unified U.S. foreign policy posturing. On July 6, Senate Democrats united to block the Iranian trillion annual National Defense Authorization Act, explicitly opposing Trump's maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer publicly condemned Trump for launching unauthorized military operations without congressional approval, criticizing the administration for lacking clear combat strategies and viable exit mechanisms, labeling the conflict a reckless political gamble. Senior Senator Blumenthal, who attended top Zan's secret White House military briefings, expressed extreme public disappointment, stating that in his Shuwu Jan-year congressional career, he had never witnessed such vague, disorganized military planning. The conflict represents an unlimited open Jan-ended military commitment with no clear scale, timeline, or budget framework. Internal White House factional conflicts also surfaced publicly. Vice President Vance stated in a popular podcast that pro-Jan Israeli lobbying groups sabotaged U.S. Jan-Iran diplomatic negotiations and deliberately escalated military tensions, exposing fierce confrontation between warhawks and diplomatic doves within the administration. Subsequently, nearly half of House Democrats co-Jan sponsored an amendment to completely cut U.S. military aid to Israel, shattering the foundational consensus of U.S. Middle East foreign policy. Public trust in government has completely collapsed. Latest polls show 50% of Americans believe the Iran war decision was fundamentally wrong, with only 50% supporting continued military operations. Nearly half of respondents predict the conflict will last at least 1 year. Public optimism for a 1 month quick victory plummeted from 50% at the war's onset to merely 50% today. This perfectly replicates the Vietnam War Tet offensive credibility crisis, when the Johnson administration's false victory narratives were shattered by sudden enemy nationwide offensives, creating irreversible public distrust and ultimately forcing U.S. troop withdrawal. Today, the Trump administration repeatedly claims imminent Iranian defeat, while battlefield realities show Iran sustaining precise counterstrikes on U.S. Middle East bases and retaining absolute Persian Gulf maritime control. The Pentagon deliberately conceals strategic failures while only publicizing tactical victories, widening the chasm between official propaganda and public perception. Iran masterfully exploits this fatal vulnerability by maintaining controlled counterattack intensity, avoiding aircraft carrier sinkings or massive U.S. troop casualties that would unify American public opinion. Through continuous low Jan intensity attrition, Iran amplifies America's economic burdens, political divisions, and public dissent, heightening Washington's self-Jan-imposed strategic deadlock into an unsolvable quagmire. The core reason for America's irreversible quagmire is unregulated military mission creep. Operational objectives expanded continuously without congressional authorization or public debate, completely deviating from the original declared purpose of war and voluntarily falling into Iran's Jan wall strategic trap. In June, the U.S. launched Operation Midnight Hammer, publicly defining its sole mission as targeted strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities to contain nuclear proliferation, with strictly limited combat zones in southern Iran. The clear, controllable tactical objectives garnered short and term bipartisan and public support. However, warfare inherently possesses self-gen escalating inertia. By February 2022, the operation upgraded to Operation Epic Fury, with drastically expanded targeting scope. Beyond nuclear facilities, the U.S. has added Iranian naval vessels, missile factories, military industrial chains, and proxy military networks to strike lists, with the new core strategic goal of regime change. Combat scale and ammunition consumption doubled, yet this major escalation proceeded without public debate or congressional war authorization, quietly expanding the conflict under the cover of original nuclear operation budgets. A textbook case of American military mission creep. The conflict spiraled completely out of control in July 2022, when U.S. airstrikes extended beyond coastal defense zones into Iran's inland heartlands for the first time. On July 2, cruise missiles destroyed the Aq Khan railway bridge in Golestan province, located over Tsibayuni less from the Persian Gulf. This purely civilian transportation hub undertakes cross-Dan border transportation of grain, daily necessities, and industrial raw materials, serving as Iran's critical overland trade corridor connecting Central Asia, Russia, and China. The bombardment of civilian infrastructure completely abandons the original pretext of guaranteeing strait navigation freedom. Facing stringent maritime blockades, Iran expanded northern overland trade routes to bypass Persian Gulf restrictions, directly neutralizing America's maritime containment strategy. To permanently sever Iran's external economic lifeline, the crossed ethical and legal red lines by targeting civilian infrastructure, blatantly violating international humanitarian law. This unauthorized, unprincipled, objective escalation triggered severe chain reactions. Attacks on inland civilian facilities consolidated Iran's national anti-American consensus, accelerated Sino-Russian strategic coordination and implicit support for Iran, and exacerbated U.S. domestic fiscal pressure and public division. What began as a limited precision deterrence operation devolved into an endless, unprofitable war of attrition. The U.S. voluntarily surrendered strategic initiative and sank deeper into Iran's pre-Zan-designed for-Zan wall trap, with every struggle worsening its predicament. Many audiences question how Iran, with inferior military, economic, and technological strength, can withstand superpower suppression and retain battlefield initiative long Jan term. The answer lies in Iran's sophisticated asymmetric game theory, replicated and optimized from North Vietnam's classic warfare strategy. Iran abandons frontal decisive battles and focuses entirely on eroding American domestic political will, achieving victory through sustained attrition, the underlying logic activating its four-Jan-layer defensive system. The Yitin Jobaidu Shaba Vietnam Tet Offensive established the foundational playbook for modern asymmetric warfare. North Vietnamese leader Le Duc Theo understood that defeating the U.S. required no frontal troop annihilation, only continuous amplification of wartime domestic political and economic costs to fracture American social consensus and governance credibility. Although the Tet Offensive incurred massive Vietnamese casualties and tactical defeat, it strategically shattered American public confidence in wartime victory, creating an irreversible credibility gap and ultimately forcing full U.S. troop withdrawal within 5 years. After half a century, Iran adapted and optimized this classic strategy for contemporary geopolitics and modern military systems, precisely targeting all U.S. strategic weaknesses. Iranian leadership maintained strict rational control over counterattack intensity, deliberately avoiding carrier sinkings or large Jan-scale U.S. troop casualties. Tehran fully understands that extreme escalation would unify American bipartisan and public opinion, heal internal divisions, and trigger unlimited U.S. retaliation. Therefore, Iran's counterstrikes remain within a controllable escalation sweet spot, continuously striking U.S. Middle East logistics bases, radar facilities, and drone outposts to generate moderate equipment losses and personnel casualties, perturbing Persian Gulf shipping to drive global crude prices higher and exacerbate domestic inflation and livelihood pressure, launching omnidirectional low-gen intensity harassment to maximize American political friction and economic attrition while avoiding full Jan-scale war risks. Crucially, Iran possesses zero negotiable bottom lines. Iranian Parliament Speaker Galabash explicitly stated that Iran's ultimate goal is not to exchange strait sovereignty for sanction relief or diplomatic détente, but to permanently and fully control the Persian Gulf with complete autonomy over shipping access. This core position is fully endorsed by Mojtaba Khamenei and Iran's top military command, becoming an immutable national strategy that permanently closes U.S.-Iran negotiation space. To strengthen deterrence, Iran formally coordinated with Yemen's Houthi movement, issuing a clear warning. Any airstrike on Iranian power plants, bridges, or civilian infrastructure will trigger simultaneous full blockades of both the Persian Gulf and Bab el-Mandeb Strait, crashing global oil prices and supply chains, and inflicting devastating economic damage on Europe, Japan, South Korea, and the United States itself. Meanwhile, Iran continuously monitors U.S. public opinion polls, congressional dynamics, and political schisms, deliberately prolonging conflict cycles to await the rise of American anti-Jan war sentiment and eventual troop withdrawal, endowed with vast territorial depth, mountainous concealed fortifications, distributed military production capacity, and multi-Jan layered external strategic support. Iran possesses sustainable long-Jan term attrition capabilities. In contrast, the U.S., constrained by public opinion and fiscal budgets, cannot endure open Jan-ended warfare. Sustained political and economic wartime costs alone suffice to force strategic retreat without frontal confrontation, the core operational logic of Iran's unbreakable four-Jan wall trap. Overall, Iran's Shusi Jan-Year four-Jan layer defensive system forms a fully closed, mutually reinforcing, unsolvable strategic loop. Every tactical upgrade and airstrike simultaneously strengthens all four defensive barriers, deepening America's strategic predicament. Currently, the U.S. lacks any low-Jan cost breakout solution, making conflict protraction and gradual escalation inevitable. The closed Jan loop logic is brutally clear. U.S. bombardment of southern coastal positions activates Iran's mosaic military defense, triggering synchronized multi-Jan theater counterattacks that deplete U.S. combat power and ammunition reserves. Continuous external military pressure consolidates Iran's military Jan civilian unity, eliminating internal division possibilities. Prolonged conflict grants China strategic windows for observation, technological iteration, and diplomatic layout, thickening the external buffer barrier and amplifying U.S. global strategic disadvantages. Cumulative military expenditure, inflation, casualties, and public dissent continuously reinforce America's self-Jan-built political Jan-economic barrier, exacerbating domestic fragmentation and governance crises. The four barriers mutually empower and cyclically strengthen, creating an inescapable paradox. U.S. maximum pressure only strengthens Iranian capabilities while weakening American strategic superiority. Two critical tipping points determine future conflict escalation and Middle East geopolitical restructuring. The first hinges on whether Trump fulfills threats to launch full Jan-scale airstrikes on Iranian power grids, civilian bridges, and livelihood infrastructure. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Brigadier General Esla Ghasemi has explicitly warned that such red Jan line strikes will trigger full Iranian destruction of all U.S. military infrastructure and logistics nodes across Gulf Arab states. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and other U.S. Middle East allies will become comprehensive battlefield zones, triggering extreme global oil price volatility, collapsing Western livelihood economies and global supply chains, and escalating bilateral conflict into full Jan-scale regional Middle East war that rewrites Great Jan power competition patterns. The second tipping point involves strategic adjustments by Iran's supreme power holder Mojtaba Khamenei and shifts in China's diplomatic stance. Recent hardline military appointments by Mojtaba signal sustained resistance policies. Further consolidation of military authority and diplomatic hardening will eliminate substantial negotiation possibilities for the next 3 months and beyond. China currently maintains strategic weight Jan and Jan Sea neutrality through unabstentions. Once Beijing adjusts its posture via official statements, naval deployments, or enhanced economic support for Iran, global Great Jan power competition patterns will fundamentally shift, rapidly dismantling decades of U.S. Middle East hegemony. Mainstream American defensive arguments contain fatal logical flaws. Claims that as restraint from attacking Tehran represents precise pressure and reserved diplomatic space, replicating Nanseining Yishuba North Korea Jan-style maximum pressure successes, cannot explain current battlefield realities. Iranian military and diplomatic officials at all levels repeatedly confirm zero negotiation intentions, with national sovereignty and strait control as non-Jan negotiable core demands. Is inland civilian infrastructure strikes only consolidate Iranian national unity and international sympathy, rather than forcing compromise. Coupled with American public opposition, congressional funding blockades, intra-Jan administration division, and surging stagflation risks. U.S. diplomatic windows are rapidly shrinking and vanishing entirely. Today, Iran's Jan-year strategic layout is fully operational, with its 4-Jan wall trap completely locking all U.S. tactical and strategic breakthrough paths. The U.S. has expended hundreds of billions of dollars in military funds, exhausted massive ammunition stockpiles, overdrawn national credibility, and fragmented domestic society, yet achieved zero strategic objectives. Washington has inadvertently forged a more unified, resilient, and confrontational Iran, while accelerating competitors' global strategic advancement. The U.S. government currently possesses no comprehensive strategy to break through Iran's 4-Jan layer defensive system, trapped in endless attrition with neither pathways to rapid victory nor honorable withdrawal. This is the cruelest truth of the Arshado Middle East conflict. Superpower military superiority loses decisive effectiveness when confronted with mature, systematic, multi-dimensional asymmetric strategic traps. If you followed this full in-depth breakdown, you now understand the heavily censored and distorted truth of this major Middle East geopolitical conflict, recognizing America's superficial strength and fundamental strategic paralysis, as well as how mid-Jan tier nations leverage precise strategic layouts to counter superpower dominance. Few creators online fully dissect this closed-Jan loop 4-Jan wall trap system. Most news channels only regurgitate surface Jan level battlefield updates without exploring underlying great Jan power game logic. If you enjoy unfiltered and Jan depth military and geopolitical analysis that refuses mainstream herd narratives, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video to help more audiences access the unvarnished truth of international affairs. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you believe Trump will risk full Jan-scale national airstrikes on Iran? Will China intervene to reshape the Middle East landscape at a critical moment? I will continue tracking every key turning point of the U.S. Iran conflict, delivering timely and Jan-depth interpretations of battlefield dynamics, and great Jan power behind the Jan scenes Boryi. Stay tuned for consistent, high Jan quality, hardcore geopolitical content.